6 months after beginning his undercover experiment, Marcus faced the most challenging decision of his career. The cultural changes he had implemented were showing positive results, but he knew that lasting transformation required him to address the disconnect between executive leadership and regular employees. More importantly, he needed to decide how and when to reveal his identity as Mike Wilson to his coworkers. The opportunity came when Marcus learned that Carmen Rodriguez, his former colleague who had been laid off, was struggling to find stable employment. Through his anonymous suggestion system, several employees had recommended that the company reach out to previous employees who might be interested in returning, especially since the contracted cleaning service continued to provide inadequate results. Marcus saw this as the perfect chance to implement a major change while also helping Carmen. He called Patricia Hayes into his office with a prepared proposal. "Patricia, I've been reviewing the cleaning service situation, and I believe we need to make a significant change," Marcus began. "I want to bring cleaning services back in-house and rehire the employees we laid off." Patricia looked shocked. "Sir, that would completely eliminate the cost savings we achieved. The board will question such a dramatic reversal." "Then I'll explain it to the board," Marcus replied firmly. "The contracted service has failed to meet our standards. We've received numerous complaints from employees, and our building security has been compromised by having unvetted personnel with access to sensitive areas." "But, sir, the financial impact—" Marcus interrupted her. "Patricia, I need you to understand something. This company's success isn't built solely on minimizing labor costs. It's built on having dedicated, skilled employees who take pride in their work and feel valued by their employer. The people we laid off understood our business, cared about quality, and contributed to our success in ways that can't be measured on a financial spreadsheet." Patricia looked confused by this explanation, which confirmed Marcus's growing belief that she was not the right executive to lead his company into the future. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked with his HR team to develop a plan for bringing the cleaning services back in-house. The plan included improved wages, better benefits, and a formal career development program for janitorial staff. He also established a policy requiring that any future outsourcing decisions be reviewed by a committee that included employee representatives. When the announcement was made, the reaction from both remaining staff and laid-off employees was overwhelmingly positive. Carmen called the company personally to express her gratitude and confirm her interest in returning. Roberto and Lisa were thrilled to learn that their friends and colleagues would be coming back. However, Marcus knew that simply reversing the layoffs wouldn't address the underlying problems that had allowed the situation to occur in the first place. He needed to implement systemic changes that would prevent similar issues in the future. His most significant decision was to establish a new position, employee advocate. This role would be filled by someone from outside the existing management structure, someone whose job was specifically to represent employee interests in executive decisions. The employee advocate would have the authority to review and veto any policy changes that negatively affected workers without legitimate business justification. Marcus also implemented regular CEO walks, where he would spend time in different departments talking directly with employees at all levels. These weren't formal inspections or scheduled meetings, but casual conversations designed to keep him connected to the daily reality of working at Wellington Industries. But the most challenging part of Marcus's transformation plan was deciding what to do about Patricia Hayes and other executives who seemed unable or unwilling to embrace the new culture. After several more incidents where Patricia attempted to undermine employee-friendly policies, Marcus made the difficult decision to ask for her resignation. The conversation was professional but frank. "Patricia, I appreciate your contributions to this company's financial success, but I believe we have fundamental disagreements about leadership philosophy that cannot be resolved." Patricia was clearly frustrated. "Mr. Wellington, I don't understand this sudden change in priorities. Everything I've done has been focused on improving the company's profitability and efficiency. Profitability and efficiency are important. Marcus agreed, but they cannot come at the expense of employee welfare and company culture. I need executives who understand that our employees are our most valuable assets, not just cost centers to be minimized. Patricia's departure sent a clear message throughout the company that the changes Marcus was implementing were permanent and serious. Other executives began to genuinely embrace the new expectations rather than simply paying lip service to them. As Carmen's first week back at work approached, Marcus faced his final and most personal challenge, deciding whether to reveal his identity as Mike Wilson. He had developed genuine friendships with his co-workers, and he felt that continuing the deception would be dishonest. On Carmen's first night back, Marcus arrived at work as Mike Wilson one last time. The reunion with Carmen was emotional. She hugged everyone and thanked them repeatedly for their support during her difficult period of unemployment. "You know what's amazing?" Carmen said during their break. "The company reached out to me personally. Someone from HR called and explained that they realized they had made a mistake with the layoffs. They even offered me a small raise and better benefits than I had before." Roberto shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like the company suddenly grew a conscience." Marcus knew this was the moment to tell them the truth. His heart was pounding as he gathered his courage to speak. "Actually," Marcus said quietly, "there's something I need to tell all of you, something important about why these changes have been happening." The group looked at him curiously. Carmen smiled. "What is it, Mike? You look so serious." Marcus took a deep breath. "My name isn't really Mike Wilson. I'm Marcus Wellington, the CEO of this company." The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen's smile faded. Roberto's eyes widened in shock, and Lisa simply stared at him as if he had said something impossible. "That's not funny, Mike," Carmen finally said, though her voice was uncertain. Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed them his driver's license, his corporate credit cards, and a photo of himself from a recent business magazine article. "I know this is shocking, and I know you probably feel betrayed, but I need you to understand why I did this." Over the next hour, Marcus explained everything. He told them about the disappointing employee satisfaction reports, his realization that he had lost touch with his workforce, and his decision to experience the company from their perspective. He shared how much he had learned from working alongside them and how their insights had shaped every change he had implemented. "So when you helped Carmen get her job back," Roberto said slowly, "that was me trying to fix a mistake that I should have prevented in the first place," Marcus replied. Carmen was quiet for a long time before speaking. "I don't know how I feel about this. On one hand, you lied to us for months. On the other hand, you're the reason I have my job back and why working conditions have improved so much." "I understand if you're angry," Marcus said. "I understand if you feel like I manipulated your trust. But I hope you can also understand that everything I learned from you made me a better leader and made this a better company." Lisa finally spoke up. "The changes you've made, are they permanent? Or will things go back to the way they were now that your experiment is over?" "The changes are permanent," Marcus assured her. "More than that, I'm committed to continuing this approach. I want to keep working night shifts occasionally, not as Mike Wilson, but as Marcus Wellington. I want to stay connected to what's really happening in this company." As the weeks that followed proved, Marcus kept his word. He continued to work periodic night shifts, now openly as the CEO, talking with employees and observing operations from their perspective. He established quarterly meetings where any employee could speak directly with him about concerns or suggestions. The transformation of Wellington Industries became a case study in business schools and was featured in several management publications. The company's employee satisfaction scores reached record highs, productivity improved significantly, and surprisingly, Profitability increased rather than decreased, despite the additional expenses on employee welfare. Most importantly for Marcus, he had learned that being a successful CEO meant much more than managing numbers and strategies. It meant understanding and caring about the people whose work made everything else possible. His experiment as a janitor had taught him that true leadership required humility, empathy, and a willingness to see his company through the eyes of every person who contributed to its success. Carmen, Roberto, and Lisa eventually forgave Marcus for his deception, understanding that his intentions had been genuine and that his actions had resulted in meaningful improvements for everyone. They became some of his most trusted advisors, helping him stay grounded and connected to the employee perspective that had been missing from his leadership for too many years. After 4 months of working as Mike Wilson, Marcus knew it was time to begin implementing changes, but he needed to do it carefully to avoid suspicion. He started by scheduling one-on-one meetings with his executives under the guise of reviewing company performance after his extended absence due to illness. His first meeting was with Patricia Hayes, the operations director responsible for the janitorial layoffs. Marcus sat across from her in his familiar CEO office, but everything felt different now. He knew exactly what kind of person Patricia was, having seen the real consequences of her decisions. "Patricia, I've been reviewing our recent cost reduction initiatives," Marcus began, keeping his tone neutral. "I want to understand the details of the janitorial service transition." Patricia smiled proudly, clearly expecting praise. "It's been a tremendous success, Mr. Wellington. We've reduced cleaning costs by 68%, which will save the company approximately $2 million annually. The transition was completed ahead of schedule with minimal disruption." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what about service quality? Have we maintained the same standards?" "There have been minor adjustments, as expected with any transition," Patricia replied dismissively. "But the contracted service is meeting all basic requirements. A few employees have mentioned small issues, but nothing significant enough to impact operations." Marcus knew this was completely false. During his time as a janitor, he had witnessed the dramatic decline in cleaning quality and had heard numerous complaints from day-shift employees. Patricia was either unaware of these problems or deliberately ignoring them. "I'd like to see some employee feedback data about the cleaning service change," Marcus said. "Have we conducted any surveys or gathered formal input from the staff?" Patricia looked slightly uncomfortable. "We haven't felt that was necessary. The facilities management team monitors service quality, and they haven't reported any major concerns." Marcus made a note on his pad. "Going forward, I want us to implement mandatory employee satisfaction surveys for any operational changes that affect working conditions. I also want monthly reports on service quality metrics, including response times for maintenance requests and cleanliness standards." "Of course, sir," Patricia agreed, though Marcus could see she was puzzled by his sudden interest in what she clearly considered minor details. Marcus's next meeting was with Brad Stevens, the marketing manager he had watched bullying his assistant. Marcus had done some research and discovered that Stevens had the highest turnover rate in his department, with 3 assistants quitting in the past 18 months. "Brad, I want to discuss your management style and team performance," Marcus began directly. Stevens looked surprised. "Is there a problem, sir? My department has consistently exceeded our targets." "Your department has also had unusually high turnover," Marcus replied. "I'm concerned about employee retention and workplace culture in your area." Stevens shifted uncomfortably. "The marketing industry is competitive, Mr. Wellington. Sometimes people can't handle the pressure. I believe in maintaining high standards." Marcus leaned forward. "I want you to attend a management training program focused on leadership and communication skills. I'm also implementing a 360-degree review process where your subordinates will provide anonymous feedback about your management style." "Sir, with respect, I don't think that's necessary," Stevens protested. "My results speak for themselves." "Results, at the expense of employee welfare are not sustainable, Marcus said firmly. Good leaders develop their teams. They don't drive them away. This is non-negotiable. Over the next several weeks, Marcus implemented a series of changes designed to address the problems he had witnessed during his undercover investigation. He reinstated annual bonuses for all hourly employees, opened the employee cafeteria to all shifts, and improved the facilities available to night shift workers. He also established an anonymous suggestion system where employees could report concerns or propose improvements without fear of retaliation. Within days, the system was flooded with feedback that confirmed everything Marcus had learned during his time as Mike Wilson. However, Marcus's biggest challenge came when he decided to address the janitorial outsourcing decision directly. He couldn't simply reverse the layoffs without revealing how he knew they were problematic, but he could take steps to improve the situation. Marcus called Patricia Hayes into his office with a stack of employee complaints about cleaning quality. Patricia, we've received over 40 formal complaints about building cleanliness in the past month. This is unacceptable. Patricia looked genuinely surprised. Sir, I wasn't aware the problems were so widespread. The contracted service assured us they could maintain our standards. Clearly they cannot, Marcus replied. I want you to renegotiate the contract to include quality standards with financial penalties for non-compliance. If they can't meet our requirements, we'll need to consider alternative arrangements. What kind of alternative arrangements? Patricia asked nervously. Marcus had been preparing for this moment. I want you to research the possibility of bringing cleaning services back in-house, at least partially. Calculate the true cost difference when we factor in quality issues, security concerns, and employee satisfaction. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Sir, that would essentially reverse the cost savings we achieved. Cost savings that result in reduced service quality are not real savings, Marcus said. They're deferred expenses that eventually cost us more in productivity, employee morale, and company reputation. Meanwhile, Marcus continued working his night shifts as Mike Wilson, though he reduced his schedule to 3 nights per week. He wanted to monitor the changes he was implementing from the employee perspective and maintain his relationships with the remaining janitorial staff. Roberto and Lisa had both survived the layoffs, but they were suspicious of the sudden improvements in working conditions. During one of their break conversations, Roberto expressed what many employees were thinking. Something weird is happening around here, Roberto said, opening his lunch in the newly renovated break room that now had comfortable chairs and better lighting. First they lay off half of us, and now suddenly they're improving everything. I don't trust it. Lisa nodded in agreement. My cousin works in HR, and she says the CEO has been asking all kinds of questions about employee satisfaction. She thinks maybe the company is trying to avoid a lawsuit or something. Marcus felt a pang of guilt listening to their speculation. His co-workers were right to be suspicious. The timing of the improvements was unusual, but he couldn't explain the real reason without revealing his identity. Maybe someone complained to the labor board, Marcus suggested, trying to sound casual. Or maybe they realized that treating employees badly was hurting the company somehow. I doubt it, Roberto replied cynically. Rich people don't suddenly develop consciences. There's got to be an angle we're not seeing. Despite their skepticism, Marcus could see that the improvements were having a positive effect on morale. The upgraded break room facilities, the reinstated bonuses, and the anonymous suggestion system were all small signs that management was paying attention to employee concerns. More importantly, Marcus was beginning to see changes in how middle managers treated their subordinates. The mandatory management training programs and 360-degree reviews were forcing supervisors to consider the impact of their leadership styles on their teams. One evening, while cleaning near the marketing department, Marcus witnessed a completely different interaction between Brad Stevens and his new assistant. Instead of the hostile, demeaning tone Marcus had observed before, Stevens was patiently explaining a project and asking for the assistant's input on potential improvements. The transformation wasn't complete. Marcus could tell that Stevens was still struggling to change ingrained habits, but the effort was genuine. The threat of accountability through employee feedback had motivated Stevens to reconsider his management approach. Marcus also began implementing changes to the executive compensation structure, tying bonuses to employee satisfaction metrics rather than just cost reduction and profit margins. This was a radical shift that initially met with resistance from his leadership team. During a senior staff meeting, Patricia Hayes voiced the concerns of several executives. "Mr. Wellington, while we support the goal of improving employee relations, tying our compensation to satisfaction surveys seems problematic. Employees might give negative feedback simply to influence our bonuses." Marcus had anticipated this objection. "Patricia, if our employees are so dissatisfied that they would manipulate surveys to hurt our compensation, then we have much bigger problems than bonus structures. Good leaders should be able to maintain high performance standards while keeping their teams happy and engaged." The CFO, Richard Morrison, supported Patricia's concern. "Sir, this approach could encourage executives to be too lenient with employees, potentially impacting productivity and discipline." "Richard, I want you to research companies that have successfully implemented similar programs," Marcus replied. "I think you'll find that organizations with high employee satisfaction typically have higher productivity, lower turnover costs, and better financial performance overall." 3 months into his double life, Marcus faced his biggest challenge yet when the layoff announcements were officially made. He learned about them the same way his fellow janitors did, through a brief, impersonal email sent to all affected employees on a Friday afternoon. The email was cold and corporate, thanking employees for their service while explaining that organizational restructuring required the elimination of several positions. Affected employees were given 2 weeks' notice, and their final day would coincide with the arrival of the new contracted cleaning service. Marcus watched his co-workers' reactions with a heavy heart. Carmen sat quietly at her cleaning cart, reading the email on her phone for the 3rd time, as if hoping the words would change. Roberto cursed under his breath and kicked a trash bin, while Lisa simply stared at the floor in shock. 12 years, Carmen finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've worked here for 12 years and they're getting rid of me to save money they probably won't even notice." Marcus wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but as Mike Wilson, the janitor, he had no power to change anything. As Marcus Wellington, the CEO, he could stop the layoffs immediately, but revealing his identity would compromise everything he had learned and might prevent him from making deeper, more meaningful changes. That weekend, Marcus made a difficult decision. He called his assistant Sarah and told her he was extending his sick leave for personal reasons. He couldn't return to his executive role yet, not when he was so close to understanding the full scope of his company's problems. The following week was Carmen's last week at Wellington Industries. Marcus watched her train her replacement, a young man from the contracted cleaning service who would earn half her salary and receive no benefits. Carmen was professional and thorough, explaining every detail of her responsibilities, even though the company was discarding her like an old piece of equipment. On Carmen's final night, the remaining original janitors organized a small farewell gathering during their break. They pooled their money to buy her a gift card and a cake from the grocery store. The celebration was held in the same cramped basement break room where Marcus had spent so many hours listening to his employees' concerns. "I want to thank all of you," Carmen said, trying not to cry. "This job wasn't just about the paycheck. You people became my friends, my second family. I'm going to miss working with you more than I can say." Roberto raised his coffee cup in a toast. "Carmen, you're the hardest worker I've ever known, and any company would be lucky to have you. Wellington Industries is making a huge mistake." Marcus felt tears in his own eyes. He was watching a dedicated employee, someone who had contributed to his company's success for over a decade, being cast aside for a minimal cost savings. The human cost of this decision was enormous, but it would never appear on any financial report. After the gathering, Marcus walked Carmen to her car, helping her carry a box of personal items she had accumulated over 12 years of employment. In the parking lot, away from the others, she finally allowed herself to cry. "Mike, I need to tell you something," she said. "I'm scared. I'm 53 years old and I don't know if anyone else will hire me. I have some savings, but not enough to last very long. My son is starting college next year, and I was counting on being able to help him with expenses." Marcus felt like his heart was breaking. "Have you started looking for other jobs?" Carmen nodded. "I've applied to several places, but most of them pay less than what I was making here. And none of them offer benefits like health insurance. I might have to take 2 part-time jobs just to pay my bills." Marcus made a mental note to ensure that Carmen received a generous severance package, even if he had to arrange it anonymously. But he also realized that her situation represented a larger problem. His company's layoff decision would create financial hardship for dozens of families, and the executives who made this decision would never see or acknowledge the human consequences. The next week, Marcus began working alongside the contracted cleaning staff to understand the difference in service quality. The contrast was immediately obvious. The new cleaners worked quickly but carelessly, focusing on getting through their assigned tasks as fast as possible rather than doing thorough work. They had no investment in the company's success and no relationships with other employees. Within days, Marcus noticed that trash bins were overflowing, restrooms were not properly maintained, and office spaces looked noticeably less clean than before. Several day-shift employees complained to building management about the decline in cleanliness, but their concerns were dismissed as temporary adjustment issues. Marcus also discovered that the contracted cleaning staff had no security clearance or background checks equivalent to what the previous employees had undergone. They had access to confidential documents, computer systems, and sensitive areas of the building, but no one seemed concerned about the potential security risks. One evening, while cleaning the executive floors, Marcus overheard a conversation between Patricia Hayes and the CFO, Richard Morrison, who were working late on quarterly financial reports. "The cleaning service transition is going perfectly," Patricia reported. "We're already seeing the projected cost savings, and there have been minimal complaints about service quality." Richard nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Patricia. This is exactly the kind of efficiency improvement that will impress the board. Have you identified other areas where we can apply similar cost reduction strategies?" "I'm working on a proposal to outsource building security as well," Patricia replied. "We could potentially save another $1.5 million annually by replacing our current security staff with a contracted service." Marcus realized that the janitorial layoffs were just the beginning. His executives were systematically identifying every service role that could be outsourced or eliminated, regardless of the impact on service quality or employee welfare. They were treating human beings as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. That night, Marcus made another disturbing discovery. While cleaning Patricia Hayes' office, he found a bonus calculation sheet that showed how much money she would personally receive for implementing cost-saving measures. The janitorial layoffs alone would generate a bonus of $50,000 for Patricia, while the security outsourcing proposal could earn her another $75,000. Marcus felt physically sick. Patricia was being financially rewarded for destroying the livelihoods of good, hard-working people. The system he had created incentivized his executives to treat employees as expendable resources rather than valuable team members. As he continued his work that night, Marcus began to formulate a plan for addressing these issues. He couldn't simply reverse the layoffs and policy changes without revealing his undercover investigation, but he could implement new systems and policies that would prevent similar problems in the future. More importantly, he realized that fixing these problems would require him to fundamentally change his approach to leadership. He could no longer rely solely on financial reports and executive summaries to understand what was happening in his company. He needed to find ways to maintain regular contact with employees at all levels and to ensure that his executives were held accountable for the human impact of their decisions. The question was how to implement these changes without destroying the trust he had built with his fellow workers during his time as Mike Wilson. Carmen and the others had shared their honest feelings with him because they saw him as one of them, not as part of the management structure they distrusted. Marcus knew that the most difficult part of his experiment was still ahead of him. He had gathered the information he needed to understand his company's problems, but now he had to figure out how to fix those problems while maintaining his credibility with both his executives and his employees. The balancing act would require all of his skills as a leader and businessman, plus some creativity he had never needed before in his corporate career. 2 months into his undercover experiment, Marcus had become a trusted member of the night cleaning crew. His co-workers now included him in their conversations without hesitation, and he had gained access to information that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional corporate channels. One evening, Carmen approached him during their dinner break with a concerned expression. "Mike, I need to tell you something important. There's going to be layoffs soon, and I think some of us might be affected." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. "How do you know about layoffs? Has management announced something?" Carmen shook her head. "Nothing official, but I clean the conference rooms where the executives meet. Last night I heard them discussing cutting costs by 20% in non-essential services. They specifically mentioned janitorial and security staff. I think they're planning to outsource our jobs to a cheaper company." This was the first Marcus had heard about any layoff plans. As CEO, he should have been involved in such a major decision, but apparently his executive team was moving forward with cost-cutting measures without consulting him. The realization that his own leadership team was making decisions behind his back was almost as troubling as the layoffs themselves. "Are you sure about what you heard?" Marcus asked, though he could see the worry in Carmen's eyes. "Pretty sure. They had spreadsheets and everything. The head of operations was saying that outsourcing could save the company about $2 million annually. They seemed excited about the potential savings." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. $2 million was barely a rounding error in Wellington Industries' annual budget, but it represented the livelihoods of dozens of hardworking people like Carmen, Roberto, and Lisa. These were employees who had dedicated years of their lives to keeping his company running smoothly. That night, Marcus paid extra attention to the executive floors, hoping to find evidence of the layoff plans Carmen had overheard. In the operations department, he discovered a draft memo on a desk titled Cost Reduction Initiative, Phase 2. The document outlined plans to eliminate 90% of the current janitorial staff and replace them with a contracted cleaning service that would provide minimal coverage at a much lower cost. The memo was written by Patricia Hayes, the head of operations, and it painted the current cleaning staff as overpaid and underproductive. According to her analysis, the contracted service would be more efficient because it would eliminate benefits, overtime pay, and what she called unnecessary personal relationships between cleaning staff and other employees. Marcus photographed the memo with his phone, his hands shaking with anger. Patricia Hayes was one of his most trusted executives, someone he had promoted specifically because of her reputation for making tough but necessary business decisions. He had never questioned her methods, assuming that her success in reducing costs was always beneficial to the company. The next week, Marcus decided to expand his investigation beyond the night shift. He arranged with the temp agency to occasionally work day shifts, claiming he needed extra income. This gave him the opportunity to observe how the company operated when all the executives and managers were present. Working as a janitor during business hours was a completely different experience. During night shifts, the building was quiet and peaceful, filled only with cleaning staff and a few security guards. During the day, the offices buzzed with activity, phone calls, meetings, and the constant pressure of deadlines and demands. Marcus quickly noticed that the janitors were treated very differently during day shifts. While night shift workers could move through the building relatively undisturbed, day shift janitors were constantly interrupted, redirected, and sometimes criticized for being in the way. Several times, Marcus watched managers speak rudely to cleaning staff, treating them as obstacles rather than fellow employees. One particularly painful incident occurred when Marcus was emptying trash bins near the marketing department. A young manager named Brad Stevens was berating his assistant for making a mistake on a presentation. The assistant, a woman in her 20s who looked close to tears, apologized repeatedly while Stevens continued his verbal assault. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence that's holding this company back," Stevens shouted, loud enough for everyone in the area to hear. "Maybe you should consider whether you're really qualified for this position." Marcus had to resist the urge to intervene. As Mike Wilson, the janitor, he had no authority to stop the abuse, but as Marcus Wellington, the CEO, he was ultimately responsible for allowing this kind of toxic behavior in his workplace. After the incident, Marcus followed the young assistant to the women's restroom area where she had gone to compose herself. He pretended to be cleaning nearby and overheard her phone call to someone who was clearly a friend or family member. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered into the phone. "He humiliates me in front of everyone, takes credit for my work, and then blames me when anything goes wrong. I know I need this job, but I'm starting to hate coming to work every day." Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility for this woman's suffering. Stevens was the kind of manager who produced good quarterly results, so Marcus had never questioned his methods. Now he realized that Stevens's success might be built on bullying and intimidating his subordinates, rather than effective leadership. During his lunch break, Marcus sat in the employee cafeteria that Carmen had mentioned was no longer available to night shift workers. The space was bright, comfortable, and served reasonably priced high-quality food. The contrast with the cramped basement break room used by night shift employees was stark and embarrassing. As he ate, Marcus listened to conversations at nearby tables. The topics ranged from work frustrations to personal challenges, but a common theme emerged. Many employees felt disconnected from the company's leadership and uncertain about their future prospects. "I've been here for 8 years and I've never even seen the CEO," one woman complained to her colleagues. "For all I know, he doesn't even care that we exist. All the decisions that affect our jobs are made by people who have never done our work." Another employee nodded in agreement. "My department head told us that upper management thinks we're all replaceable. He said we should be grateful for our jobs and not expect any special treatment." Marcus realized that his absence from the daily operations of his company had created a leadership vacuum that was being filled by managers who didn't share his values or vision. He had built a successful business, but he had failed to build a positive workplace culture. That afternoon, while cleaning offices in the finance department, Marcus discovered more evidence of the disconnect between upper management and regular employees. A bulletin board contained several notices about new policies and procedures, all of which seemed designed to benefit the company at the expense of employee comfort and convenience. One notice eliminated flexible scheduling options that had previously allowed employees to adjust their hours for family emergencies. Another restricted personal phone calls and internet usage to break times only. A third required employees to provide detailed justifications for any office supply requests over $25. These policies had apparently been implemented without input from the employees they affected, and the tone of the notices was condescending and authoritarian. Marcus realized that his executives were managing through fear and control rather than trust and collaboration. As his day shift ended, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of the problems he had discovered. The layoff plans were just the tip of the iceberg. His company had serious cultural issues that were affecting employee morale, productivity, and loyalty. The gap between his intentions as CEO and the reality of working at Wellington Industries was enormous. Marcus knew he needed to continue his investigation to fully understand the extent of the problems, but he was also beginning to formulate plans for addressing them. The challenge would be making changes without revealing how he had obtained his information and without destroying the trust he had built with his fellow janitors who had shared their honest perspectives with him. After 3 weeks of night shifts, Marcus had become comfortable with his new identity as Mike Wilson. His hands were rougher now, and he had learned to move efficiently with his cleaning cart through the hallways. More importantly, he had started to blend in completely. The other janitors now treated him as just another member of their team. During his 4th week, Marcus met Carmen Rodriguez, a janitor who had worked at Wellington Industries for 12 years. Carmen was a single mother of 2 teenagers, and she had been assigned to train Marcus on the more detailed cleaning procedures for the executive floors. She was patient and kind, explaining everything carefully while sharing stories about her children and her dreams of saving enough money to go back to school. "This job isn't glamorous, Mike, but it pays the bills," Carmen told him as they cleaned the conference rooms together. "The benefits are decent, and the company treats us fairly most of the time. Though I have to say, things have gotten tougher over the past few years." Marcus tried to sound casual as he asked, "Tougher how?" Carmen glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then spoke quietly. "Well, they used to give us annual bonuses. Nothing huge, but it helped during the holidays. That stopped about 3 years ago. They said it was because of budget cuts. But then we heard about the executives getting bigger bonuses than ever. It just doesn't seem fair, you know?" This was news to Marcus. He remembered approving the elimination of janitorial bonuses, but it had been presented to him as a minor cost-saving measure that wouldn't significantly impact anyone. He had never considered how important those bonuses might be to families like Carmen's. "Also," Carmen continued, "they used to let us use the employee cafeteria during our breaks. The food was subsidized, so it was cheap and good. But now they say the cafeteria is only for day shift workers. We have to bring our own food or buy expensive snacks from the vending machines." Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. Every decision Carmen mentioned had crossed his desk at some point, but they had all been presented as insignificant policy changes. His executives had assured him these modifications would improve efficiency and reduce costs without affecting employee morale. During their break, Marcus sat with Carmen and 2 other janitors, Roberto and Lisa, in the small basement break room designated for night shift workers. The room was cramped, poorly ventilated, and furnished with old chairs that looked like they had been discarded from other parts of the building. Roberto, a man in his 50s who had worked security and janitorial jobs his whole life, was particularly talkative that night. "You know what bothers me most about this place?" he asked the group. "It's not the work, or even the pay. It's the way some people treat us like we're invisible." Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Just last week I was cleaning near the executive elevators when some big-shot manager was talking on his phone. He was complaining about having to cut costs, and he said, 'These cleaning people are replaceable anyway. We could hire anyone to push a mop around.'" Marcus felt his face burn with shame, even though he wasn't the manager Lisa was talking about. He realized that his leadership style had probably influenced his executives and managers to think about employees this way. "The worst part," Roberto added, "is that they don't understand how much we actually know about this company. We see everything. The late-night meetings, the documents left on desks, the way different departments treat each other. We know which managers are good to their teams and which ones are bullies, but nobody ever asks for our opinion about anything." Carmen laughed bitterly. "Remember when they hired those expensive consultants to do a study about improving workplace efficiency? Those consultants probably got paid more for 1 week than we make in 6 months, and we could have told them everything they needed to know for free." The conversation continued, and Marcus learned more disturbing details about his company. He discovered that middle managers often took credit for their subordinates' ideas, that the human resources department was more focused on protecting the company than helping employees, and that many good workers had quit because they felt unappreciated. and undervalued. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to see patterns in the complaints and observations he heard from his fellow janitors and other night shift workers. The problems weren't random or isolated incidents. They were systematic issues that stemmed from the company culture he had created, often without realizing it. One night, while cleaning the human resources department, Marcus accidentally overheard a conversation between two HR managers who were working late. They were discussing employee complaints and how to handle them with minimal impact on the company's bottom line. "Just document everything and find reasons to dismiss the complaints," one manager said. "Most of these people won't pursue legal action, and the ones who might can be settled quietly. The important thing is to protect the company and keep the executives happy." Marcus was horrified. This wasn't the company culture he had intended to create. He had always believed that Wellington Industries treated its employees well, but he was discovering a huge gap between his perception and reality. The next morning, instead of going home to sleep, Marcus drove to a coffee shop near his office building. He needed time to think about everything he was learning. He had been CEO for 15 years, and during that time he had focused almost exclusively on growth, profits, and shareholder value. He had delegated most human resources decisions to his executives, trusting them to handle employee relations effectively. Now he realized that this approach had created a company where the people at the top were completely disconnected from the people at the bottom. His executives were making decisions about employee benefits, working conditions, and company policies without understanding how these decisions affected real people's lives. Marcus thought about Carmen, who worked 2 jobs to support her teenagers and still couldn't afford to take time off when she got sick. He thought about Roberto, whose years of experience and insights were completely ignored by management. He thought about Lisa, who was studying online during her breaks, hoping to eventually move into a better position within the company, but who had never been given any encouragement or support from her supervisors. These were good people, hard-working, people who deserved better from their employer. They weren't just human resources or labor costs on a financial spreadsheet. They were individuals with families, dreams, and valuable perspectives that could help make Wellington Industries a better company. But Marcus also realized that fixing these problems wouldn't be simple. The issues were deeply embedded in the company structure and culture. Many of his executives and middle managers had been rewarded for years for reducing costs and increasing profits, regardless of how their decisions affected employees. Changing this mindset would require more than just new policies. It would require a fundamental shift in how the company operated. As Marcus finished his coffee and prepared to go home, he knew his experiment was far from over. He had learned enough to be deeply concerned, but not enough to know how to fix everything that was wrong. He needed to continue his undercover investigation, to dig deeper into the problems he had discovered, and to find ways to address them without revealing his true identity too soon. Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the busy city streets below. At 38 years old, he was the youngest CEO in his company's history, having built Wellington Industries from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire in just 15 years. The glass towers, luxury cars, and designer suits that filled his world had become so normal that he barely noticed them anymore. His assistant knocked softly on the mahogany door. "Mr. Wellington, the monthly reports are ready for your review," Sarah announced, placing a thick folder on his massive desk. Marcus glanced at the papers, his eyes immediately drawn to the employee satisfaction scores. They had dropped again for the 3rd month in a row. "Sarah, schedule a meeting with HR. These numbers are concerning," Marcus said, tapping the disappointing figures with his gold pen. He had always prided himself on being a good boss, someone who cared about his employees. The company offered excellent benefits, competitive salaries, and modern facilities. So why were his workers becoming increasingly unhappy? That evening, Marcus sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the same reports. His dinner grew cold as he studied every detail. The numbers told a story he didn't want to believe. Employee turnover was at an all-time high. Complaints about management were increasing, and productivity was slowly declining despite record profits. He called his best friend and business advisor, David Chen, who had known him since college. David, I need your honest opinion. Do you think I've lost touch with my employees? David paused before answering. Marcus, when was the last time you actually spent time with your regular staff? Not the executives or department heads, but the people who keep your company running. Every day? The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he had a real conversation with someone from the lower levels of his company. His days were filled with board meetings, investor calls, and strategic planning sessions, the closest he came to ordinary. Employees was seeing them in the elevator, and even then they seemed nervous and uncomfortable around him. I think I need to understand what's really happening in my company, Marcus told David. But how can I get honest feedback when everyone treats me like some untouchable boss? David suggested the obvious solution, anonymous surveys and focus groups. But Marcus knew these methods had limitations. People might still hold back, afraid their opinions could somehow be traced back to them. He needed something more direct, more real. That's when the idea struck him like lightning. What if he could observe his company from the inside, without anyone knowing who he really was? What if he could see how his employees truly felt about their jobs, their managers, and their workplace when they thought no one important was listening? The next morning, Marcus called in sick for the first time in 5 years. Instead of going to his office, he drove to a different part of the city and walked into a temporary employment agency. He wore old jeans, a simple t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He had grown a beard over the past few months, which helped disguise his appearance. I'm looking for cleaning work, he told the agency representative, using a fake name he had practiced. Mike Wilson. Night shifts preferred. I'm good with my hands and don't mind hard work. The woman behind the desk barely looked up from her computer. We have an opening for a janitor at Wellington Industries. It's night shift, Monday through Friday. The pay is $15 an hour. Are you interested? Marcus almost laughed at the irony. His own company was hiring him to clean his own building. That sounds perfect, he said, signing the paperwork with his fake identity. 3 days later, Marcus reported for his first night as Mike Wilson, janitor. He had spent hours studying janitorial procedures online and even practiced mopping floors in his penthouse. He wore work boots, old clothes, and carried a lunchbox like he imagined a real janitor would. The night supervisor, a tired-looking man named Tony, barely glanced at him during the brief orientation. You'll be covering floors 30 through 45, Tony said, handing him a cart full of cleaning supplies. Vacuum the carpets, empty the trash, clean the bathrooms, and wipe down surfaces. Nothing complicated. Just don't touch anything. On the desks, that looks important. As Marcus began his first night of cleaning, he felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. He was about to see his company through completely different eyes. The executive floors he knew so well looked entirely different at night. The impressive conference rooms where he made million-dollar decisions were now just empty spaces that needed vacuuming. Other cleaning staff members nodded at him politely, but didn't seem particularly interested in conversation. Marcus realized the janitors were practically invisible to most people. During his years as CEO, he had probably passed dozens of cleaning workers without ever really seeing them or wondering about their lives. As he worked through the night, Marcus began to notice things he had never seen before. In one office, he found a small photo taped inside a desk drawer showing a family with 3 children. The desk belonged to someone in accounting who Marcus knew earned barely enough to support such a family. In another workspace, he discovered a resignation letter that hadn't been submitted yet, expressing frustration with unfair treatment and impossible deadlines. The employee break room on the 15th floor was nothing like the executive dining. area Marcus was used to. The fluorescent lights flickered, the chairs were uncomfortable, and the refrigerator made concerning noises. A bulletin board was covered with notices about mandatory overtime, policy changes, and reminders about dress codes. None of it seemed designed to make employees feel valued or appreciated. Marcus found himself working slower than the other janitors, not because he was lazy, but because he was absorbing every detail of this new perspective. He was seeing his company as his employees saw it, and the view was troubling. The beautiful lobby and impressive executive floors were just a small part of the building. Most of his employees worked in areas that felt more like warehouses than the innovative, inspiring workplace he had imagined he was providing. By the time his shift ended at 6 in the morning, Marcus was exhausted but enlightened. He had learned more about his company in one night than in months of executive reports. As he drove home in his ordinary sedan, he knew this experiment was just beginning. He needed to dig deeper, to understand not just what his employees' physical environment was like, but how they really felt about working for Wellington Industries. The transformation from billionaire CEO to night janitor was more challenging than Marcus had expected, but it was also more necessary than he had realized.